they're almost like they live in a different world. The military's down, the morale is down, the money isn't there. They're going looking for a couple more wars to fight.
Yeah.
It makes no sense whatsoever. But no, we don't have to worry. It's not the military anymore because there's been a coup. Have you heard? It's the CIA coup. The CIA runs everything. They run the military. They're the ones who are over there lobbing missiles and bombs on these countries. It's not even the military that does that. The CIA runs this. And of course, the CIA is every bit as secret as the Federal Reserve. And yet, think of the harm that they have done since they were established since World War II. They are a government unto themselves. They're in businesses. They're in drug businesses, and they take on dictators. We need to take on the CIA.
Yeah.
Although the neuroscience that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes is new. The government's interest in the brain is not new. And in a way, for me, this is a personal story. So this is Henry Murray. Hardly anybody knows who Henry Murray is anymore. Actually, Henry Murray was one of my father's best friends. My father was a psychiatrist. And Henry Murray was the director of the psychological clinic, the psychological laboratory at Harvard for many years. He was an MD who became interested in psychology. He worked for the U.S. Army during the Second World War. During World War II, the U.S. Army had the idea that they could use some of the new social science that was being done to assign soldiers to duties in a more rational way. So I don't know how many realize this. You have probably taken personality tests. But the first personality tests came out of the Second World War. They were Army. The development of those tests was sponsored by the Army. Henry Murray was head of that. He was the first chief psychologist after the war of the OSS. Anybody know what the OSS was? The Office of Strategic Services, which became the CIA. And he published a very important book in the history of personality theory called Assessment of Men, which was basically a summary of the work that he had done during the war for the Army. Now, Henry Murray wasn't the only one who was doing this kind of thing. Kurt Lewin, whose real name, by the way, was Levine, but my father published his first article, his first paper in my father's journal, and convinced him that, you know, it's better not to have a real Jewish name in America in the 40s. So he changed it to Lewin, which sounds more exotic somehow, right? So Kurt Lewin, another example, founded modern social psychology, was also an OSS advisor on psychological warfare. And one historian has estimated that if you looked at places like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Penn, the top research universities in the country, probably about a third of the scientists at those universities were supported by national security agencies. That includes what used to be called the War Department, now the Defense Department. Sounds better, doesn't it? Defense Department sounds better than the War Department. And the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency. This was a common element of the university. And I'd like to say to my students, you know, imagine now the big research universities, including perhaps UC Santa Cruz, without any government money. Subtract all the buildings that would not be here if it hadn't been for government funding. That would give you an idea of the impact of the relationship between the academic world and the United States government, starting with the Second World War. Basically, if any of you have ever gone to Boston, to Cambridge, MIT would not be there. It'd be a couple little buildings. Most of Harvard wouldn't be there. Much of Penn wouldn't be there. Much of Berkeley wouldn't be there. Right? And you know what came out of Berkeley, of course, was the early physics that led to the atomic bomb. So this was a very close relationship that has evolved over the years, and now it's virtually inseparable. What government funding and the academy is joined at the hip. J.B. Rhine was the Duke University for many years, famous. He actually created the term parapsychology and extrasensory perception and the term psychological operations or PSYOPs. He was CIA supported from the early 60s on. Ryan did experiments for the CIA in remote viewing. Anybody know what remote viewing is? You know, we spent a lot of money on this in the 60s and 70s, probably also as a way to get the Soviet Union to spend a lot of money on it. And at this point, and I've interviewed people who were around in those days, nobody really knows whether we were spending money on it because we believed in it or because we were getting the other guys to spend money on it. How many of you know that the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who was a Harvard undergraduate in the late 50s, was in a psychological experiment. And it was a humiliation experiment. I can tell you the details, but in essence, he was part of this experiment. He wrote about it in his manifesto. He remembered it as a very unpleasant experience. So this again is an indication of how close the Academy was to these experiments.
There are some who say that the Army of the future, being able to do 100 push-ups won't be too essential, but to be a computer whiz and have a strong thumb, someone who's grown up playing video games, maybe what we're after.
But I think we're going past the thumbs, Patty. I mean, we're going to eventually direct neural implants or ways to magnify what's going on in the brain in certain regions so that it can be read out to a machine and the machine gives immediate feedback to the operator. I mean, that's, I think, where we're going. In fact, we're much more likely to cross lines if we think our survival is at stake. If we need better warfighters than anybody else because we think our children's lives hang in the balance, we will be more likely to cross lines than we would in other areas of human endeavor. The key in any conflict is to make the other person, the adversary, feel defeated. If the person feels defeated, then they are defeated. It's not about game theory, it's about psychology and culture.